Okay, Pelle. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and for tomorrow, a happy 4th of July for all of our American viewers and those many people across Europe and the rest of the world who admire so much of the wonderful Hollywood movies, hamburgers, and weapons of mass destruction and defense that we have showered on the world in our genuinely generous and that if haphazard way over the last century or so. We have today as our guest a polymath. Karl Maier is an outstanding management consultant, an expert on the restructuring of companies across America. His record is quite extraordinary. He has produced the Abingdon Principles, but I stand to be corrected on the detail. And please enlighten us, Karl, of dealing with what has become one of the greatest problematic issues across business in Western culture. Deal with basically the arteriosclerosis of both thinking and structure in how manufacturing function across America. Karl is, I apologize for flattering you over much, but you most certainly have earned it, a visionary genius in what he has achieved, and in even more extraordinarily, explaining in clear terms what he has achieved. But he is also a rather frightening, but absolutely essential prophet on the vulnerabilities of our power grid and the need to reassess and in some respects restructure our energy grid and the structures of dissipation use of energy that we all take so much for granted and are so ignorant of. Karl, welcome on board. And for our first question, the issue that you are jumping into immediately, what should we be most concerned about the state of our energy grid in the United States and for that matter in Western Europe too? What are the warning signs and what needs to be done as soon as possible?
Wow, quite a grand list, but yes, let's jump in.
We start big, exactly.
The world is changing so much. Energy is such a core part of our modern society, and underpins basically everything we do. I live in Houston, and so barely a survivable environment without electricity and air conditioning. So, we feel it very, very directly. I think we've got a heat wave in Europe where we're seeing some of the impacts of the same type of challenges of keeping up with all that. And we also have the manufacturing changing in the world right now as well. So global trade's been upended. We've got the war in Ukraine, the war in with Iran. So many things changing, and so the electricity demands are changing and have to keep up with that. And in the US, Western Europe, transmission is a huge challenge to get the electricity to the right place. We've all become accustomed to what we've got in terms of transmission capabilities. But as the energy sources are changing, Russia's situation is changing, what the US is doing with energy is changing. So, yeah, it's very concerning. Do we have the infrastructure, the electrical transmission infrastructure to be able to get the electricity to where it needs to be so we can, deliver everything from food to, air conditioning to manufactured goods. So, yes, quite.
Well, is the answer yes or no? Yeah. I mean, your suggestion is that that's a rhetorical question, which is going to be answered by no, presumably.
I don't think we have the grid in place that we need right now to be able to satisfy what's happening in the world, the changes that are happening. There's a lot of technology that's moving forward, but there's so much to be done with the grid to keep up with what we need to do that, no, I don't believe we're in a good place right now.
What do we need to do first, Karl?
Yeah, that's we've got a bit of a chicken and the egg kind of problem. What type of electricity generation are we going to have? Where's
Yes,
that going to
yes,
be? And
yes.
then where's the demand? So, it's certainly you've got a chicken and egg issue going on there. What's happening with the Middle East oil? We've just recently had a burst of supply as all the ships that have been cooped up in the Persian Gulf have been. Will that will those shipments continue? Are we going to have to presumably to some degree? And so what does that mean for the grid? What's the political, we've got countries around most of the developed economies already have very high levels of debt. Where do we find the investment funds to upgrade the grid that we need to take the manufacturing and maintain the agriculture, use the alternative energies? I wish there was a simple step 1, 2, 3, and we're going to solve the problem. I mean, we're talking about vast sums of money to upgrade the grid to be able to handle the demands we're looking at. So I wish I had that 1, 2, 3. Here's the solution. But I think we've got to engage a lot of people, different interests to get that answer.
But I mean, can you be a bit more concrete? We don't know the power grid that we're going to build unless we know the energy sources in the next 20 or 30 years, right? And does that require presumably huge investment, perhaps from the state, or will we? I mean, is this a kind of a limitation of the free market? And do you need like you had an investment in the highway system, like you had the investment in the interstate highway system in the 1950s? That was an American state thing, and then the economy would follow, but you couldn't get private actors to construct the entire highway system, something like that.
I think that's a great analogy. The Tennessee Valley Authority here in the United States in the 50s and 60s built out a lot of the electrical kind of infrastructure that it's very difficult for private companies to do. I mean, we have regulated utilities which kind of have a state and private element to them. So, we can certainly do that to a certain degree, but in the US we've got different grids. Texas has its own grid, and there's limited interconnectivity between the grids. So there's not many places that really move electricity long distances, and we haven't really tried to tap the what would be required to tap the newer technologies to have this like superconducting type of transmission, so that you could have long, high efficiency, longer distance transmissions. So then you get back into where do we put the plants? And well, not in my backyard. It's usually the first answer, right? And so, are nuclear facilities going to be politically acceptable? With the limitations, what's Russia, the changes in what's going on in the Middle East right now, we've got some real challenges in how do you do that. I do think some level of government incentive and participation, at very least permitting, is needed to get those kind of transmission lines in place. So, yeah.
If we can follow up on that, Karl, I think what you've just said in your very meticulous and scholarly, very clear way, you've quite revolutionary challenge to both the Republicans and the Democrats. Because what I see in what you say is a quiet but devastating indictment of our energy policies and energy and scientific and industrial illiteracy in the United States over the past 50 years. what you have pointed out is nobody ever talks about the Tennessee Valley Authority anymore. And when they do, among all conservatives, all Republicans, all libertarians especially, they're energy illiterate. They assume that it's just a big government ripoff. But as you point out, the TVA is essential to turning the Beverly Hillbillies into the Clampetts of Beverly Hills, taking all the dire poverty, the ghastly, unconceivable poverty for Europeans that all of Middle America was in through the 1930s, and transforming it into the prosperous mid-America of the 1940s, 50s, and 60s. But of course, since the 1970s, we've had two other issues. We've had the conservative revolution in America, under which there has been no government intervention in the energy market and the energy infrastructure whatsoever. It is regarded as being ridiculous and Stalinist and ludicrous investment. Leave it all to the free market. And the free market has been illiterate and at best and utterly destructive and cancerous at worst, because money has, as happened in the British Empire 100 years earlier, has reached into the financialization giant systems of Wall Street, and none has gone into energy infrastructure, into new power stations, into grid interoperability whatsoever. As you know, we've not built any, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't believe we've built a single in the last 50 plus years. And then Richard Nixon added a further curse on us in the 1970s with the Environmental Protection Agency, which I know you, from the look on your face, you know all too well. It is virtually in China. They can build a new power station, whether it is nuclear or coal, and they're still very much into coal, and they're also into nuclear, from scratch, and have it up and running, and they build dozens of them, and they have it up and running from a standing start in 4 years, with simply because of our legal structures and legal decisions and precedents and the enormous bureaucracies of the federal government, most of all the EPA. We are lucky if we could do that in 20 to 30 years, and usually we can't even do that. So it seems to me Republicans and Democrats alike in Congress and across the country are utterly illiterate about this. How do we reach the new generation? Because it seems to me we have to start from scratch. We have to have a revolution in thought before we can revive physical infrastructure.
Right. I think that's an excellent assessment, Martin. An example is a few years ago in Texas, we had a freeze come down, very unusual freeze came through, and it disabled gas-powered power plants.
I remember, yes.
Yeah. And, and there were simple remedies to prevent, what in most parts of the world would be a light freeze, to prevent those resources from, shutting down. And the investment just wasn't made. And so once that crisis happened, the electricity board in Texas was largely replaced. The politicians recognized that this was an issue, and they went forward of investments. So it may be that we need a crisis to create the political will to be able to address these things. What that would look like might be a little scary.
Now, even following up on that, there is also, of course, a lack of institutional support on this. The Greens, with their anti-industrialization mythology, are really, I would see it as the new Savonarolas, but they have this enormous support at grassroots level, at local level, and most of all at federal political level with the big political parties. They're even big with the Republicans, things like the Sierra Club. They're enormous with Democrats. They run the Democrats in lockstep. I would have big oil and big energy. We still have major corporations in America, and really Texas, thank God, and Houston are still their major strongholds. But it seems to me they don't have even the most visionary and responsible people. They don't have a conception of the need to educate across the country at grassroots level. Do you see any institutions or structures or movements that are being supported or should be supported by the big gas and oil corporations, which of course are demonized across the country, and we need to combat too? British heavy industry like Vickers was demonized as causing World War. They did, but they were demonized for, as doing so, and even across America, believed this nonsense in American ways, just as in Britain it was believed. But it was the Spitfires and Hurricanes that saved Britain and Western civilization in 1940. And I see the need. We need to have Hurricanes and Spitfire equivalents, reviving our energy grid and our energy capabilities and infrastructure now. And we need to have Exxon and Chevron and the other great American majors leading the charge on this and funding on this, the same way Vickers and other great British major corporations held the line for rearmament in the nick of time in Britain in the late 1930s. Do you see do you know of any people who recognize this apart from yourself and myself and people like Bob Bryce? I mean, where should we look to start this revival?
Right. Well, I know there are many people who actually understand the issues, have looked into it deeply, especially a lot of people who understand the energy space and, absolutely understand, that, the limitations of some of the green views and the oversimplified, short clips that are easy to, put onto YouTube or whatever the social media platforms. The longer form analysis, like your podcast, is the type of thing that, is needed to understand things at a little deeper level. You don't need to become a world expert, but it's more than a 30-second clip to say, oh, there was an oil spill somewhere. It's a little deeper analysis is required. And I do think that's a limitation of social media. And, I think it brings up a whole question of, should there be limitations on certain types of, claims on social media? So, how do we educate people on complex issues? People, it's natural to want a simple answer to a complex issue, but, it's not going to get us good policy if all we're acting to the, we need to save the whales or whatever the
exactly
blip is. Yes.
So. You've written or talked about reimagining power, the breakthrough set to change energy forever. What do you mean by that?
Could you repeat that, Pelle? I cut out.
Yeah, you've written and talked about reimagining power, the breakthrough set to change energy forever. What do you mean by that? What's that? What is that breakthrough?
Well, one of the technologies that I've had dealings with is a new way to take piezoelectric, which is a very long-term, well-understood technology that's, it's in, your quartz watches, it's in your microwave beep, it's in all sorts of consumer products, flashing lights on sidewalks that, and it works fine, but no one's ever been able to scale this simple effect so that you could actually have a viable generator. And I'm familiar with a company that has invented a way to do this scalably so that you can have a megawatt and potentially hundreds of megawatts of power generated with water as your fuel. And so that's a one of the ways that I see technology moving forward to help us. It's an amazing technology. It's not going to replace all energy. It's probably not going to be cost effective to replace some of the natural gas or perhaps some of the other established technologies. But it's a way to, at the margin, really help move the energy challenges forward, with a safe, green solution, that, these are the types of things I see. Hopefully one day we'll have, fusion. We're still some time out from that, but these are some of the things I'm thinking of.
Could you be a little bit more technical, but not so technical that you lose
Actually,
the audience?
if if I may come in here to explain to you, Pelle, uh, Carl, we have to have you back not just once, but quite seriously for a whole series of shows, because I don't think we've ever had a guest like you, and we think the world of our guests. But every time you quietly and carefully open your mouth, you release intellectually devastating flashes of light and bombshells that are quite formidable. But you clearly need an old-fashioned Irish hack journalist and demagogue from tabloid background, like my good self, of course, to make this clear. Because what have you just said? Piezoelectric. But you didn't mention Nikola Tesla, and you didn't mention the Great Pyramid of Egypt, and you didn't mention the megaliths. Nikola Tesla tried to do this 130 years ago. He built, with the funding of J.P. Morgan behind him, a gigantic tower. I mean, it was built at Wardenclyffe on Long Island. You can click in seconds for our audience out there, and you can see pictures of it, to the exact dimensions of the Great Pyramid. This sounds like crackpot, insane nonsense, but it is history. It was done. But nobody has been able to replicate this. Now you are coming up and saying quite clearly here, no, of course, we still can't replicate it. It isn't a conspiracy theory. There are serious issues of engineering and physics involved here. And Tesla had the vision. He could not implement it. We're still wrestling with doing that now. But what you are saying is, but there's a lot we can do on the smaller scale that will make an enormous difference. Piezoelectric effect is real. As you say, it's in quartz watches, it's in flickering lights. We use it on a daily basis, but we are so energy illiterate and so ignorant on the history of technology, we do not realize where this works and how it can be replicated, not on a gigantic science fiction scale, but as you say, on a small scale, which still makes an enormous difference on a human level. I recall, I'm old enough to remember, and 20 years ago, the ancient history, as you know, for our kids, I mean, as far as our young growing adults go, that's the equivalent of living in the Dark Ages. And the late Senator John McCain, who was an illiterate jerk, comes up with the brilliant idea, let's make an absolute super battery for solar energy, and then all our problems will be solved. And the old fool imagined it would happen in his own next Senate term. Well, it still hasn't happened. And not because, of course, as you well know, because the big, bad, evil oil companies and energy companies are blocking it, but because the physics and the engineering, and not to mention the basic laws of science and common sense, are in the way of it, which we might want to ask you to explain to our viewers in a separate show. But what you're saying is we can have an equivalent of that, whereas solar energy batteries are not practical, advancing the technology in modest ways of the piezoelectric effect that will make an enormous difference in day-to-day life, not just in America, but of course the developing world too, is really practical and feasible. Block it or stop it. It's just not being done. Nobody dreams it's there. Is that a reasonable summation?
Yes, yes, I think that's a fantastic look at it. The grand project, the single solution that solves all the world's energy problems doesn't feel reasonable.
Exactly.
there are so many ways we can incrementally move the needle that in total add up to quite a big impact. Yeah.
Exactly.
But when you talk about some really basic question, you talk about using water as fuel.
Right.
Is that splitting the chemical composition of water? And in what way would you do that? And how does that relate to quartz watches?
Right. So that's a very good question about, like splitting the water into oxygen and hydrogen. That is not what the piezoelectric is doing in this case. It's so you're taking metals like a rare earth type metal and placing them close together, and it's like a car. You've got I guess in the old days you'd crank start a car, you'd kind of prime it, and then it would create enough electricity with that piezoelectric. It goes back and forth. So a movement next to a certain type of material creates an electric pulse.
I see.
Or the reverse, an electric pulse next to a certain type of material causes movement. And so if you set up the conditions, what you're actually doing is boiling the water at a very, very small scale. But that boiling of the water quickly creates like a bubble. And the collapsing bubble, it's a vacuum. So you've created a very small vacuum that collapses, and that collapsing is a rapid movement. Piezoelectric material creates a pulse. And that gives enough energy to both repeat that, so kick off some extra energy. So you've got a loop, and it's a very, very small scale, but you repeat that. You have an array of these water containers with the little bubbles being created. And so you've got to kind of stack up a whole bunch of them to get a significant, if you're going to power your house, you might need 100 or 200 of these little things, each creating the loop. So then you've got enough to power, a small house all of a sudden.
Right. And the energy that goes into boiling the water is presumably less than the energy released by this process.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Oh,
Go ahead.
No, there is an engineer, I'm sure you're familiar with him. There is an engineer called Christopher Dunn out in the Midwest, and he has solved the mystery of what the pyramids of Egypt were for, because there is hard evidence for this, because the so-called King's Chamber and Queen never burial chambers, not the slightest hint that they ever were. Well, clearly, you know this already. It's a piezoelectric effect working exactly the way that you explained. We have the trace elements of zinc solutions and of hydro were available in basic form in the Bronze Age eras when the pyramids were built, and we find them in these chambers. And when you combine them together, you create effects that produce hydrogen that immediately creates the bubbling and distorting effect on water on a large scale below. And there were pools below this, and this is what generated ultimately microwave effects. Now, we didn't know what microwave effects were. Tesla was probably did and was certainly conceptualizing it in whatever his own terms were. But microwave energy as a practical technology is found by accident by a couple of researchers who found that a microwave generator they had was popping popcorn beside them. Now, if that had happened in England, of course, it would have been forgotten immediately, or somebody would have written an academic paper in Oxford or Cambridge, as happened in the case of the discovery of penicillin, and nothing practical would have happened for the next 2 or 3 generations, or it would have been forgotten. But this was the United States, thank God. And they thought, oh, cracking popcorn. Everybody likes sweet popcorn. And that's how microwave ovens were discovered and developed, as you know, and invented. But it's the same technology. It's the same basic principle that was discussed. So in a way, I would maintain one key element of your strategy was discover who liked corn. And everything else, all our microwave technology in cooking certainly stems from that. But
Yeah.
again, the Great Pyramid confirms the same principles you are talking about. And all of this hasn't been covered up or suppressed by big bad energy companies. On the contrary, energy companies, it seems to me, are only too eager to make profits out of piezoelectric effects, just as they rightly have been out of fracking and have been out of other advanced technologies as well. But in a broader scale in society, nobody knows the potential is there.
Right. Yeah. It takes time to commercialize these, to,
Yes.
test them. It's a long cycle. And yeah, it takes investment and perseverance. So
how does the piezoelectric effect and all that connect with your interest in the electrical grid? I mean, does piezoelectric effect, if we adopt that, do we have to have a massive investment in one direction rather than a massive investment in another direction? Can piezoelectric generators reduce our need for an extensive power grid, or what? How do the two issues connect, if
actually
at all?
use these piezoelectric generators locally. And so, if they're on site, it waters your fuel. There's no worry of, caustic chemicals or leaking fuel or, explosions. So it's easier to have them in a home, at a business. And so that can reduce the need, for transmission. Is it alone going to have a massive effect? Not in the short term, for sure.
Right. But I mean, are there test plants on a household scale or a small town scale? Because people like myself had never heard of this thing. Think
right, and this is still
where's the proof of concept?
Yeah, I've seen a working model that would replace about enough power to power an apartment. I've seen it at that scale. So it's in the process of moving up the technology progression to the point where it would be fully commercialized. So it's not fully commercial at this stage. So it's not a shock you haven't heard of it. But
so maybe 5-10 years or something. Are the
right.
Chinese doing something about it? I mean, they seem to be living in 2050 already.
Yeah, maybe they are, but I'm not aware of them doing that. So
yeah. Of course, what the Chinese are doing, and I'd like your comments on this, Karl, is they take nuclear seriously, but they also take coal seriously. Are there lessons for us in that?
Yeah, they've realized how dependent they are on the Middle East energy, and they've done a lot to diversify. Yeah, what they've done with coal, with been very aggressive with nuclear. They've stockpiled oil. So their purchases of oil over the last 3 months with the happenings in the Persian Gulf have actually pushed down the price of oil globally because they've just stopped purchasing so much, to such a degree. So yeah, it's fascinating what they're doing. And if you look at the United States, we have by far, we're like the Saudi Arabia of coal. And, we, rather than developing like cleaner ways to use coal, we're just not using it at the present time. So, that's a tough question, but yeah, there seems like there might be more potential there.
Karl, we've got two or 3 minutes left. Sorry. Do you want to give a shout out? Can you just sell your book does that cover these topics? Show us your book.
Surfing Chaos is my book. It's available on Amazon, and it talks about the impact of all the changes of the collapse of globalization in the world, the impacts that has on businesses, and particularly focuses on businesses in the US and how they can take advantage of this opportunity, the changes in the world.
Good. Martin, got one more question. We've got two minutes left.
Well, no, I've got many more questions. So please come back,
We're going to have
Carl,
you
for
come
parts
on
two.
again. By the way, if there is some interference, because we've had power cuts in Winchester for the first time in decades, and that's due to the hot weather, I think, and the fact that the UK has the highest energy prices in the world, I think, So in Europe, we're in real trouble,
Oh,
and nobody's
if
talking
I
about it. Yeah.
if I may add there an echo of what you were just saying, Carl, Britain's insane problems there. 70 years ago, the brilliant and still shamefully underrated British Labour Party politician and leader, Aneurin Bevan, Nye Bevan, described Britain as being surrounded by oceans filled with fish. So therefore, he said it was insane that in the 1940s, the British people should be freezing cold and starving. Of course, that was a result of the socialist government of which he was a major part of. But he recognized the centrality. He had started life as a coal miner. He recognized the centrality of coal, and he would have embraced the model now. I think one show we should have you back just alone on is the lessons we should be learning from China.
I'd love to.
And we'll have to wait with that because we got to that. But by way of excusing us, if there is an interruption, I'll try and cut them. It does kind of add atmosphere to the fact that we're talking about energy and
Yes.
electricity and connectivity issues. It's like wearing a tin hat and sitting in a trench or something. Anyway, thank you both, gentlemen. We love to have you on again, Carl. Thank you.
Thank
Very
you so
interesting.
much, Carl.
Thank you. My pleasure.